Want to thank you all for coming today. We're going to give you an update on the fatality kennel fire that we had on September 18th. I appreciate your patience. I apologize for the lateness on this. We were trying to meet with the families and didn't want to shortchange the opportunity to be able to be there and spend a little more quality time and trying to provide the answers that are very important to them right now. What our focus is on right now is where the fire originated. That's what we're going to be talking about this afternoon, as well as identifying some potential sources of ignition. We're going to be we did an evaluation on intentional versus unintentional actions that could have contributed to it. It's the evaluation of the timeline and fire spread is what you'll see in a few of these slides. We'll determine some causal factors related to this incident, and then finally, really what our charge is today, hopefully, is to help educate, enforce, and then collaborate on some necessary changes and options that are available for us to make sure that our furry little family members are cared for. Also, at the end of this, I will be available to answer some questions to the degree possible. I'll try to give you as much information as we can, but this continues to evolve each day. First and foremost is the fact that this is about those 75 names that are listed there today. And there's 59 families that are affected, and I continue to still be frustrated and in shock that I can't report that there were any survivors. And we're going to talk through that here shortly. And just because I can understand and or communicate to you the why, it doesn't make it any better, just like it doesn't make it any better for those that lost their loved ones that day. So here are some of the facts. The call came in shortly before 11 p.m. We run military time, and it was 22:55 when the first 911 calls came in. The call gets routed. What happens in a dispatch center is that they'll ask fire, police, medical, what's your emergency? It was determined that there was a building on fire based upon the smoke and flames. They then went forward and were able to substantiate the address, and then they routed that call. Our fire dispatcher then pressed a button. Automatically, fire units were dispatched to the fire. It was dispatched initially as a structure fire other, as they were getting additional information to determine that this is a commercial style business. Specifically, it was housing animals. It was a boarding kennel facility. From time of notification in the fire station, the first crews arrived at 23:01, so 1 minute past midnight. The total time for response was a little over 4 3/4 minutes, 4 minutes and 48 seconds from the time of dispatch to the time of arrival. So we know that the outcome on this fire had nothing to do with the speed of response. What we're going to talk to is some of the characteristics that led to that fire. A little background, this building itself was constructed in the 1950s, and I'm going to be talking in general terms with you all today. This is from the 1960s. It used what sometimes people will consider a type 2 construction using metal, but in buildings, as you start to use other types of construction, wood and other things, it changes what we'll define as something as more of a type 5 construction, because there were still some combustible materials that were involved. And that's not uncommon. A lot of the construction that happens in business and commercials will have those type of construction features. You'll see a little bit of a yellow line around that, but that's the area that I'm really focusing on to talk to you about, because those had heavy metal beams, and it was fire resistive, but on the inside we still had fires. And this is an important takeaway. Just because a building can look like it is fireproof, it's what's inside and how fire behavior occurs that leads to fire events. Because on the outside, when you look at this building, it's hard to believe that 75 lives were lost. But on the inside, what we can talk to is what happened. When we look at fires, the very basic way to look at it is that it takes 3 things for there to be fire. You need there to be heat, you need there to be oxygen, and then you need there to be fuel. So if I have this book that's made out of paper, and I hold a lighter to it, so this is the fuel, I then hold a lighter to it, that's the heat, and there's oxygen in the room itself. As I have this lighter here, I'm heating this up, and then this composition changes, and it now starts to change its form. It's no longer solid, it becomes more of a gas. As it starts to change into that form, that starts to rise typically along with the heat, and then that's where what's burning is actually the change in the elements of the material. I'm going through this because this is what helps understand what created a really devastating environment in this building, and in all buildings, quite frankly. So when we look at smoke itself, smoke rises. For those of us that have been around campfires, we know that we sit there roasting the marshmallow. As we get closer to the fire, it gets hotter on our hands, or we start to see changes in the marshmallow where it starts to brown and things like this, and then it can smoke. The other piece that we have is that with conditions, right, if it's windy out and you're at the campfire, all of a sudden you're the unlucky person that has the smoke blowing in your face. Well, that has to do with airflow and circulation. So what this graphic here is just illustrating is that when fire occurs, generally speaking, heat, gases, smoke start to rise. And in a building, if they don't have anywhere to go, they hit a ceiling level and they start to bank and move over. And then in buildings like kennels typically will have some sort of circulation system in. They'll use fans and other mechanical devices to help create airflow and allow for a more comfortable environment for those that are within the kennel system. This is no different. There were fans and other systems that helped move oxygen and air around that building, and within that, that also helped contribute to the further propagation of some of the smoke. These are our initial findings. Again, the investigation is still underway. This is a basic diagram. By no means is it to scale. It's simply a representation of what the general layout was. What's missing on this graphic is the exterior portions of the building, such as fencing material and other things like this that also come into play with this, but it had no bearing as it relates to the fire event itself, so they've been excluded from this graphic for that purpose. Inside the building, you'll see a graphic there with a circle on the left-hand side that shows AO and AI. AO stands for area of origin, and then the second piece, area of ignition. What we look at in a fire when we're trying to determine cause is first we have to determine where it originated, because I can't say what caused a fire without first trying to investigate where it happened. What were the construction materials, contributing factors, and things like that. We know that the fire ignited at approximately 2240. This is approximately. We're still working through a variety of evidence that's coming in, but we know this to be factual because we have some inside video that corroborates when we saw some initial findings that suggest that there was some sort of ignition right around that time. Next slide is going to show approximately 12 minutes later. This is important because from approximately 10:40 p.m. to about 10:52 p.m., what we noticed, and this is corroborated through video surveillance, is that the general smoke conditions stayed in that portion of where the AO-AI, so the area of origin, area of ignition. We saw smoke and some flames in that general area. However, we started to see that through normal fire behavior, as the smoke and things were coming up, we started to see the smoke starting to naturally gravitate towards the opposite side. The reason being is that it had nowhere else to go because it was up against that interior perimeter wall. Interior wall, not the perimeter wall. Approximately 5 minutes later, so prior slide we showed 22:52, which is 10:52 p.m. We saw a discernible change in conditions within about 3 minutes. And that had to do with the fire allowed to grow, get hotter, develop more off-gassing, more development of consumable items, to where those rose, and then we started to see a change in the conditions across the entire environment. We then saw that the fire continued through, and then this slide here shows an exterior view of a photo. In that circle there, you'll represent the general location of where the Ponderosa Pet Resort is located. At 10:54:45, there was no indications from the outside of the building that there was any fire involvement. On this slide, you'll see in that circle now what appears to be flame or venting out of the building roof. Again, going back, 10:54 and 45 seconds. Fast forward, 25 seconds, all of a sudden you had venting through. That is substantiated by some interior video where we showed that the video circuitry shut down right at the 22:55 or 10:55 p.m. time frame. It also shows that the smoke and everything and what we're calling, and we're still getting additional footage that we're unencrypting and looking through, it looks like there was some flash over type of activity. What that means is that as smoke heat rises, it gets to the point to where there's enough of a reaction to where it causes a quick flame over the entire building that then creates like a torch effect that can superheat other elements along a wall that contributes to more fuel development. But what we do know is that on arrival, we had a building where it had ventilated out of the roof, so basically 2 skylights on both extreme sides of the building had already ventilated out, allowing the hot gases and flames to come through. These are the known facts. The area of origin has already been identified. This is a prime area of origin, and it's inside the kennel boarding facility in the graphic that was depicted earlier. The probable ignition source, again, started at approximately 22:40, which is 10:40 p.m. using military time. The probable ignition source is still under investigation. We believe it's a singular source, but there are probable elements that contribute to that ignition that still have to be ruled out. We're going through an active investigation still, using some third parties to also go through those that may have been the initial source of ignition. The building materials may have contributed to the actual spread of the fire during the latter portions of it. The fact remains, though, that this fire was in a relatively contained area in an open room, much like this. It's like this portion of the room here having a fire and staying contained in this room, even though there's nothing separating it. It just had to do with some of the thermal balancing and the way that the smoke was being produced, and some heavy steel, we believe, was helping keeping it contained in that area. Those conditions changed after 12 minutes to where all of a sudden we started to see a change, and that's where there was a greater flash of some fire in that area that allowed for the continuation of that. This building was not supervised with any smoke or heat detection devices. What that means is that there weren't smoke alarms or heat detection devices that were being monitored by any off-site business owner or entity. And there also was no fire suppression system in place. So the only way that we were notified of this event is when somebody was driving by and noticed flames coming through the roof at 10:55 p.m. Current actions. Things that we're doing immediately is that we've gone into our fire codes and looked for information that can help us better define occupancy such as this. Georgetown, just like many other jurisdictions, relies on an international fire code. In the international fire code, it refers to kennels and other animal control facility type of businesses as being a business. It's under the same category as a car wash. That seems counterintuitive. We've created some language that is going to create a definition for an animal occupancy, and we're going to be bringing that forward a little bit later. We also have done an audit across the city in the ETJ, the extraterritorial jurisdiction area, and identified 26 facilities that will meet the definition that I'm about to show you. We also have coordinated the investigation with third parties, and we also are continuing the evaluation of all findings. And so this fire is still undetermined at this time. However, we have a very strong belief in the area of origin and a handful of probable ignition sources that are still being ruled out. The basic burn evaluation of construction material occurred where we removed, through permission, some of the material within the kennel to actually put it under fire conditions just to determine to what degree it helped with fire spread. But again, going back to what I shared earlier, the fact that this fire was contained for a 12-minute period without much growth, and that's corroborated through video, and then it changed, shows that generally speaking there was good building material, but then when it flashed, that's where we're looking at, is there some contributing things that we can look at for those conditions to help lessen that impact in other future buildings. We did attend the International Code Council meeting during the week of September 20th, and at that Code Council hearing, our intent was to support a proposition for a change in definition to allow for animal occupancies. The person who had proposed that item unfortunately did not show up to the hearings, and that item was pulled, and so we were not able to advocate and support that change. Nonetheless, what I can say is that change that was being proposed was very similar to the change we already have in our current code amendments, and that was simply that any business occupancy that has animals should be sprinkled if it's over 10,000 square feet. We already have that requirement in the city of Georgetown. This facility was 8,000 square foot, and it did not have sprinkler systems or smoke detection because it's not required by code. And that's something that we're currently under review, and leads to that last bullet point of us actively soliciting feedback from stakeholders within the community. those that own boarding facilities and those of us that also have family members that are staying temporarily within these boarding and kennel facilities. Those items are going to be under review for potential changes. This is the draft language that we're currently contemplating, and we're going to be presenting to our Building Standards Commission later this month. That is very specific to where it is intended to take into account the broad range of facilities that may have pets boarded. Essentially what you'll see within that definition that it does not have an impact to individuals that are private owners or renters of a home caring only for their animal. It also excludes agricultural animals. The focus is for domesticated dogs, cats, and other pets that are being cared for by someone else in a facility, and that's the definition. This definition itself will be presented to the Building Standards Commission, and then later on it will be presented to our council for consideration. The language, once we define what businesses would be impacted by this, we then go in and we look at what necessary changes could take place. The very first and foremost one in my mind is early activation of the 911 system. That can be done by what we call a supervised alarm monitoring system. We have the option for it to be a smoke detector and or a heat detection type of a warning system. Those options are there because in a non-climate controlled environment where some kennels operate, where they don't have air conditioned units but they rely on fans and other cooling devices, those ones don't perform well when you're using a smoke detection device. It can create a lot of false alarms. What we'd be proposing is for those types of facilities to be using a rapid heat detection change device, which would then notify any changes in heat, would then allow for that notification. We're also looking at how we can further influence the use of certain building materials to reduce the amount of smoke and or heat that can be generated. Clearly in this situation that was one of the contributing factors. On the positive side, we saw that the fire stayed relatively contained in a singular area, but then there was a rapid change within 2 minutes, and we're trying to better understand the causal impacts of that and what we can do to reduce that in the future. And then the final piece is understanding that it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's also taking into consideration the different types of kennel and boarding type of facilities. Understanding that if one has a system where they have an indoor-outdoor run, so you have a kennel or a boarding facility where they have the ability to use a pet door to go inside and outside, I call that an area of refuge. That would allow some of the animals under deteriorating conditions to self-preserve. And with that combination of the early activation of 911 would be an opportunity for there to be less loss of lives or no loss of life. The next steps, we're going to be meeting with the Building Standards Commission, as I mentioned earlier, on October 14th. Through that, it's an advisory committee for the City of Georgetown. They'll be reviewing this code as well as some other codes that we are looking for ratification on. That Building Standards Commission is simply there to give some additional support and information to us so that when we go to council, we're able to then present to them the findings for the Building Standards Commission as well as our findings as a department. There's a coordinated investigation of the possible ignition sources that are taking place later this month. What we have identified is in the area of origin, there was a malfunction of some sort. What I mean by that is there was some items that were in that general location that possibly malfunctioned that caused the initial ignition of combustible material in that area, which then led to the fire. We're going to have that evaluated with the hope of trying to identify singularly what device it was. Was it attributed to a malfunction? Was it a known malfunction? Is there a recall on the device? Is there a wiring issue? What was the malfunction that had to do with that element? And that's what's being investigated further with a collaborative effort later this month. We'll then be proposing code changes to council in November and December. The final investigation will be reported after these findings come in. And then our plan is to, and hope is quite frankly, to share information with other jurisdictions. And I appreciate your interest in being here today as well. Our hope is to allow for the word of this to be spread, not only here in Georgetown, but across the nation, so that people have more awareness to this type of situation and some of the contributing factors, so that we have a safer, more informed citizenry. With that, I want to thank you for your time. I'd be happy to answer some questions if you have some specifics. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that the fire department attended the ICC to support changing animal occupancies. Obviously, it was pulled because someone who proposed it did not show up. Was that person with the fire department?
No. No, I have no knowledge of who the original proposer was. The way the international codes work is that they typically get adopted in 3-year cycles, and so there's a lot of entities, and sometimes it's maybe a fire department, it could be a developer, it could be a business owner. They seek input from a variety of stakeholders, and whoever made that proposal did not show up. We just knew that there was a proposal and we were there to support that, and so it was pulled, and so we were unable to support it, and we weren't in a position where we could propose a new item because those aren't the rules that are allowed that late in the game. Good question. Thank you. Sir.
Just to be clear, you're talking about all these proposed changes, but under the rules that exist right now, the owner did nothing wrong?
Correct. So the current rules that we are considering and will be proposing are not required, were not required. Georgetown, just like many other jurisdictions across the U.S., use a book like this. It's the International Fire Code, and you can adopt it wholesale to where you agree with everything as it's across the nation, or you can create local amendments. We've already adopted some local amendments in this to where we've reduced the size of a building that can be considered a business occupancy without there being suppression and notification systems. And we put that to 10,000, which is more restrictive than what this book requires. But this building was under the 10,000, so it was not required. We're having a new look at this to where we are considering not including a size threshold. It has more to a use threshold, and that's why we're focusing on definitions. Does that answer your question? Yes, sir.
When you were talking about the malfunction of equipment, can you just generally tell us what was in that area of the county?
No, I can't. I can say that we've got the general area, and it's a small footprint, and there was a handful of items that were in that area that are being looked at. And I'm using the term malfunction because it's premature for us to say exactly what caused, but we do know that there was a ignition, a flash of some sort in that location, and there was no humans or animals or anything in that vicinity on video to suggest that it was something done intentional. So there was some sort of compromise at that point in time.
So, sorry, was the meeting you're talking about, the guy didn't show up, was that after this event?
This was after the event, yes, sir. So this event happened on September 18th, which was a Saturday late at night. Yeah.
I know it said it's not the way things are done, but in light of that, there's not something like more you could have done to press the issue. I know it's not what they do, but this just happened. I mean, I would think that you'd be like, okay, well, throw our hands up. Can't do it because the book says so. But,
so that's where. So in answer to your question, we don't want to be in a position to throw our hands up. There's nothing we can do. The code, there's always been a process for how reviews go. So I'm not going to get involved in how the international code gets adopted. What I can say, though, is that they give us the flexibility at a local level to make changes. And that's what we're doing. We're not waiting. If it was a national change, it would take place in 2024. And it's only for those jurisdictions that adopt that most current code. Where it makes a difference for us here in Georgetown is us trying to bring some national attention to it. But what we do at a local level is we make an amendment as soon as we can after having all the facts and connecting all the right dots to make an informed decision that helps protect others and make us safer.
I was in reference to the one that
yes, sir.
Did show up, like y'all couldn't take that.
We couldn't, under the rules and stuff like that, yes, just the general proceedings.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, ma'am.
So you have a double focus, finding out what caused this specific fire and amending codes to keep that from ever happening again.
Yes, they go hand in hand.
When do you think the fire investigation will be complete?
I can say that we're having more information later this month, the latter part of the month. So they're going to be getting into the building again, and we've got that area secured for a more robust investigation to try to identify the contributing cause of ignition. later this month. But then those findings can take some time to really sort through. Regardless of all that, it would be very simple for me to just say that somebody had a lighter there, lit this on fire, and then caused it. It doesn't change the outcome. The outcome was 75 dogs lost their lives. 59 families are now impacted by that. While we want to know if there's fault leading to the ignition of the fire, the reality is we have all the information we need right now to know that there needs to be some necessary changes and or discussions regarding early notification. The fact that a fire got as large as it did before 911 was accessed had everything to do with the fact that there was not a smoke alarm or heat alarm device that was required in that type of a building. Does that answer your question?
When you were talking about the alarm that senses I think you said a rapid change in heat, doesn't that indicate that it's already a fire exists?
It can, yes. And so everything assumes a fire exists. So if you have a smoke alarm, something has to catch fire, and then it can smolder, and sometimes it's just smoldering and it'll go up, and there's benefits to both. Heat is more about a change in heat, and you can have different thresholds at which it's activated, just like a sprinkler system. The sprinkler systems are typically activated when the temperature changes at an upper level to a certain a temperature that's pre-identified for the building use. As it relates to this facility itself, we know that in that environment, a smoke detection device may not be the preferred way because it may have worked, but it also would have a lot of malfunctions. And so as an alternative to that, they can do a heat change device, which then still notices a change and then it activates the 911 system. Does that answer it?
And as far as the sprinklers, which buildings are required to have sprinklers?
So in this category that we're talking businesses, a lot of things fall under that. It has to do with size of building. So anything over 10,000 square foot would require a sprinkler system. When it comes to different uses such as care facilities and others, they have a lower threshold in size and number of people. And so that's all driven by the code and use of the building.
The floor plan slide that you showed, where were most of the dogs located in that section?
That entire footprint is essentially several rows of kennels, so it runs the full horizontal length of the building as well as in that front right corner.
The L part?
Yes, ma'am.
So they were throughout that area?
Yes, which is typical in many boarding facilities. All right. Do you have another one, sir? Yep.
You stated that, trying to find out what happened is important, but y'all want to see what you do prevent it in the future.
Mhm.
Why do those have to go hand in hand? You can't, they don't, it sounds like that's important, but this is further in the future is more important. I don't see why they're similar or tethered together necessarily.
Thank you for the clarification. By no means am I suggesting that one is more important than the other. What I'm suggesting is I don't want to give any indication that we're trying to slow play anything and say that we have to wait for a final investigation that may or may never be complete and that may or may not need to lead to any conversations regarding necessary changes to code. What this means is that we have enough information right now to make an informed decision and make recommendations for necessary code changes so it can run parallel with an investigation. You're welcome.
So the fire department got on scene at 11:01. When did they enter the building?
They, within a few minutes right after that. So the first engine in was located from our station on Airport Road. Second in engine came off of Williams Drive in Rivery, and they made entry on what we call the Delta side, which would have been the right side of the building. And they were confronted with high heat and smoke on that side. And that's where the fire behavior, which is corroborated through video, shows that where it started is not where the highest intensity of the heat went, and it goes back to really understanding how fire behavior works and what contributed to that, and also the external videos that show the ventilation of the gases, but also when you self-ventilate, you also then have the build-in of additional oxygen. Going back to that triangle, you have heat, fuel, and oxygen. And so as smoke is generated in an enclosed building, and more buildings are becoming airtight through energy code requirements and other things, that keeps those hot gases, it displaces oxygen, and all of a sudden, sometimes those fires can snuff out until all of a sudden there's now an influx of some oxygen, and all of a sudden, then you get a flash, can vent, and then it brings in some more, and it creates another generation. So yes, they made entry within a few minutes right thereafter. But a lot of this fire involvement was all still up at the upper levels, and it was an unenclosed ceiling. It's an open area, kind of warehouse kenneling style facility. So there wasn't a void space or anything where fire was hidden behind, and it was a lot of the gases up there.
How long did it take to put the fire out?
I don't have that information immediately available to say the specific time frame, time stamp on that, but they had significant control within the first half hour or so. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I don't want to be morbid, but when the firefighters arrived, were there signs of life?
I arrived shortly thereafter, and I had no signs of life, and we had no reports of any of the firefighters hearing any animals upon entry into the building. Yes. And it is also my belief that based upon what we've seen in video and how it was generated, again, the fire stayed in a small portion of the building, and it's an open area, just like we're here today. So again, it's a good visual for you to think of in this side of the building, a fire happening, and these could all be kennel rows here. The smoke is all staying kind of in this general area until it didn't, and that happened within just a 2-minute period. So very quickly, and then it created the right environment to where there was a flash, and quite frankly, my personal view of it, because I walked the scene the next day as well as I was there when they pulled out some of the crates, is many of the dogs did not have any smoke, or did not have any fire damage at all. They were still, and I think they succumbed to the smoke or the toxins of the smoke. And that's a hard thing for these families to live with, and for any family to live with. Many have the biggest fear, including myself, of drowning or dying in a fire, and we can't help but think of what ifs. And I wish I could give the assurance to every single person, but I have, through my own personal observations and being there during the fire event as well as the next day during the investigation, that to a large degree, the majority of the dogs did not appear to be panicking, and they did not appear to have sustained fire injury. And also being in this business for about 30 years, I know that generally most people black out, including animals, due to the effects of the smoke before there's any heat issues, and we didn't see a lot of that. All right. Well, thank you for being here today and helping us spread the word. Thank you.